Yep. I tend to do that, coming right on the dot, but then sometimes there's like, oops, I have the wrong link or something.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, Jason.
Hey, everybody.
Carrie, hi.
Hi, Carrie. Do we call you Carrie Rose or Carrie?
Either is acceptable. First name is Carrie.
So Rose Pace is the last.
Yeah, Rose was my maiden, and my TV name, but I kept it when I got married.
That's a pretty name.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a blue sky out there today. That's nice. Yeah, folks are slow to jump in today. Usually we have a whole bunch early. Well, I'll give it another minute. Hey, Anthony.
Hey, Don.
Hey, Kyla.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. We have Will and Calvin. I saw him for a minute.
There he is, the elusive Calvin.
I'm late just getting in, trying to hurry and eat lunch. I had a bunch of accidents this morning, so we've been busy. Good Lord.
Hey. Well, I'm so glad you could join us today. We are going to be talking about some objectives, and we need your input. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I do think a handful of others are going to be joining us, but we have the most important people here, so we might as well go ahead and start. Just kidding. Let me share my screen. This always takes a second to get right, so. That's not doing it. I have to flip screens. Hold on. Okay, are y'all seeing presentation view?
Yes.
Okay. And I can't really see all of you anymore, so Wendy is going to keep an eye for folks who unmute themselves and might want to say something, like go ahead and speak up. She'll keep an eye on the chat, and this really is a very interactive day, so definitely want your input. And we have the advantage, Jeff Crawford, our co-chair for this group, is also, he sits in the buildings and energy meetings, which are always the day before. So he's already had a practice round. so that's super helpful to have his input as well. All right, so drafting objectives is today. Go ahead and change your name if you in the right of your little thumbnail. There are 3 dots. If you click on that and then rename yourself, go ahead and put your first name, last name, if you want to use your pronouns, and say what organization you're from. That would be really helpful. So we're all still getting to know each other. But today's agenda is settling in and going over the ground rules quickly and reviewing the proposed RVAgreen 2050 structure. It's going to be great because you guys are really going to see that the work we've been doing makes sense in a bigger picture. And we'll kind of introduce what inputs are going into this planning process. And the discussion points are the pathways to climate action and resilience goals, and the discussion on the objectives, and then wrap up in next steps. So our activity today is going to require a lot of individual thought, and we want to just quickly go over those ground rules. It's going to be building off of each other's experiences and expertise, so please feel free to speak up at any time to have your questions clarified, help generate ideas, make sure if we're saying something that isn't clear, the language 101 is really important now when we're getting into kind of defining these objectives. We want to use terms that speak to all of our stakeholders. So the RVAgreen 2050 structure looks like this. The goals answer the question, what are the long-term aims we want to accomplish? The vision is, what does the ideal future look like when RVAgreen 2050 is implemented? The community priorities are, what cross-cutting public values do we want to center in our plan? And that's, we've gone over all of that in the previous meetings. The vision tool really gets at all of those community priorities. The pathways answer the question, what leverage points will lead us towards realizing and operationalizing the goals and community priorities? Objectives are, what are the long-term aims we want to accomplish, organized into the different pathways? And then next week, we'll get to the strategies. What are the SMARTY projects, programs, and policies that will lead us toward our objectives? And then finally, the implementation plan is, how are we going to implement, measure progress, and ensure accountability in this plan? So first, the goals. They have been established through the council passed resolution last June on the RVAgreen 2050 goal. So the climate action goals are, first, achieve a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 from the 2008 baseline. And the second one is achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. On the climate resilience side, that goal is prepare for, adapt, and improve the city of Richmond's resilience to the local impacts of climate change. So this is an integrated approach, just to remind you, equity-centered, and everything we're talking about is incorporating those goals within climate action and climate resilience. Our vision, this is the statement that was revised by the roundtable after receiving feedback from all of the working groups. So where it stands now is, all Richmonders, regardless of their identity or neighborhood, thrive in a climate resilient and climate neutral community. And so that's the vision statement, and the supporting principles are, I just kind of bolded the statements that jumped out at me. Well-being, local ecosystems, and economic vitality are balanced. Equitable access across the entire city to resources. Everyone has the ability and resources to take ownership, and we lead with race in our work to transform systems. The community priorities, again, these were the ones that were generated through all of the listening sessions with the community. And so these are the guiding principles, community priorities that we are incorporating into all of our work. And so where we are now, we've defined the goals, we've defined the vision, we've defined the community priorities. Now we're going to talk about the pathways. So Buildings and Energy met yesterday. They confirmed that their pathway is Buildings and Energy. The Waste Group met this morning, and they edited theirs a little bit. It is now Waste Reduction and Recovery. And so this group gets to weigh in on the pathway called Transportation. So this is what those draft pathways look like. Just to remind you, the pathways are how we set up the working groups. Each working group is now looking at its own pathway and description, that mission statement description, and coming into a consensus. So we're going to be looking at the name transportation, and then the statement of what we're trying to accomplish, accelerate the transition to clean and equitable mobility systems. So be thinking about that. All of that whole statement is completely open to change. It's just what the sustainability team drafted to get us started. But it's all open for comment. So this is now an open conversation. This statement, transportation as the draft pathway, and that statement, accelerate the transition to clean and equitable mobility systems. That is kind of the overarching theme of what we're going to be trying to accomplish in all of our objectives and strategies. So what do you like? What don't you like? What's missing? Could it be said better? We want to hear from you. So go ahead and unmute yourself, and this can be an open discussion.
Could I ask if there's any issue with making it transportation and mobility as the draft pathway? That might just be my thinking, that transportation is systems, but mobility goes beyond that to the quality of our sidewalks for folks who are less able, things of that nature. If that's inclusive of transportation, that's great, but I think we should show that mobility is the goal, transportation is the system, if that makes sense.
Great point. What do others think?
If as we look at this, I think it may be worthwhile understanding our users on these systems, and in this case with the green and the climate structure, what of the unclean energies that they're using, or what of the inequitable costs that they're experiencing. A lot of transportation still does include the cars or the diesel vehicles. And so just being conscious of, we're moving towards clean, and we're gonna have to make a lot of changes along the way for the user equipment.
So something like equitable acceleration, or accelerate the equitable transition to clean mobility systems.
The transition for all, I mean, just really getting back to that we are serving all people in a race forward scene. So it's equitable mobility systems, including the user equipment or the individual capabilities, individual access. So individual ability and user equipment. Because the system is going to need to support the consumer choice to also join the city on green endeavors. It may be that in our transportation energy, a big portion of that is individual trips, individual people in cars.
I don't know how to phrase it necessarily, to fix the phrase, but I believe somewhere in there we got to also think about education, make awareness, because I think a lot of people aren't really aware of what they can do or should do, or what we're going for. So that somehow I think we got to figure that in. I don't have the answer, but
might that be an objective more than in the statement here?
Or a strategy under one of those
Yeah,
objectives.
sure.
true,
Yep.
true. Right. Yeah.
But that's a great point. That's a good point.
It is, I think, because this conversation is so completely new. Waste reduction is pretty straightforward. People know what that means. And then buildings and energy, there's a lot of education, but a lot of that's being done on the back end, on the grid and energy sources and decision makers. But in this one, transportation is every single citizen. So probably the education piece, the awareness piece might be a little more critical, but I don't know. It's a good point.
So this is Julie. I like that it's short and sweet, actually, and I think kind of those components that lead to equity is what would be kind of in the next. What did you guys call that in the objectives, right? And I would even take off the word systems, accelerate the transitions to clean and equitable mobility. I like it simple, sweet, and then deal with push all the details into the objective statement.
I second that, because my question when I see systems is transportation enrichment is one giant system with a bunch of different modes. So are we talking about different modes of mobility? I like the idea of removing systems because that heightens the focus that it's about mobility.
So question, because I've heard it in a couple different ways. Do we want an equitable transition or do we want equitable mobility?
I think you want equitable mobility personally.
I like equitable mobility.
Okay.
I think Julie said what I was trying to say a lot better than I said it. So yeah.
I heard accelerate the
Thanks,
transition to clean and equitable mobility for all.
Because it includes equitable,
Yeah.
that may be already incorporate for all.
Take away from all.
That sounds great, but I also want to highlight that the transition itself needs to be equitable, as in any community wealth that is built through that transition can't be, centered in the folks who already got it. You know what I mean? So I think we have equitable in there, but we just need to make sure that some of our goals and some of our objectives make sure that transition is done in an equitable way. If we end up with an equitable mobility system that does not share the community wealth, then that is not an equitable system inherently, is the only thing I want to point out there.
So would it make sense to reverse the sentence and say to accelerate the transition to equitable mobility, and that is clean, I don't know, sustainable, whatever the right words are?
I would like to add maybe something I was thinking about. A lot of people in the transportation ways in many areas are, what I'm missing and thinking is safe. A lot of people may think of transportation as a way means to get to point A to point B or C or whatever. And a lot of people may think, oh, this might be, equitable or like very clean, but is it safe? Like a lot of people may think of it like, hey, can I get to this side without having reluctance of like other demographics or anything that could be transpiring of like this pathway.
Yeah, good point.
I think that's an important aspect of sustainability. In a way, it's not what we usually think of as sustainability in environmental sense. But one thing that also came to mind, and I'm thinking maybe in this, from my thing, is also something that might go more in the objectives or strategies. But one thing that I wanted to mention is that, and I might be just reading into this, but transition makes it sound like it's something we don't have already, that we're moving to something entirely new, but a lot of the best solutions we already have. It's just about kind of making them better.
So is it more adoption? I'm sorry.
Improved?
Yeah, or prioritization. That's kind of a long word, but maybe something like that. Because I think I'm reacting partly to this, GM saying they're going to do all these electric cars, and everybody's like, yay! And it's like, okay, that helps, but that's not the whole solution. And that is what I think of when people think of transition to something new. They think, oh, I'll just switch my car out, for a different one or something. So that may be why I'm reading into it that way.
Have a proposed state. Well, first of all, let's start with the draft pathway. Is everyone happy with transportation and mobility? Any thumbs down? Put you on the spot. Okay, well, we are now officially transportation and mobility. Now for that statement that goes underneath, I've heard a lot of different things, and I don't want to, I would like for someone to make a proposal. We have lots of great things.
So it's kind of what Jason was saying. I still like it short and sweet, and maybe instead of transition, you say expand, accelerate the expansion of clean and equitable mobility. I think there are elements under equitable which would be, safe, convenient, accessible, healthy. All those things to me are kind of getting encompassed in that equity, and we put those in the objectives. I definitely think safety is very important. But I think it should be short and sweet. The longer it is, the harder it is, I think.
Could I follow up on that and ask if you think that clean falls under equitable? Is clean energy inherent? You know what I mean? To shorten it even more, is that possible, or does that not fall under equity for you?
It doesn't fall under equity for me necessarily. I'm not Julie, but
Yeah, because I'm thinking in my head, this is RVA Green 2050. So like to me, like we should say that and say it's in an equitable way. That's why I think it needs to be pulled out.
Do we want to mention a path to decarbonization equivalent to RVA Green's bottom line goals? So decarbonize by 2045.
I don't think we need to add an extra goal here. We could have strategies that would get us there further down, but this statement, we just want to make sure that it kind of sets the stage for everything that we're going to put underneath it.
Because we're building a pyramid here, so that is already inherent, is written big and bold across the top. And I think what we need to do is say, okay, within transportation and mobility, what are we doing to achieve the larger goal that all of the working groups are working on? So I think we're going to nail that a lot in what we're about to do and in some of the strategies that we end up drafting, but that's good input.
But I think this clean has to be more than just emissions. It's heat islands, and there's a lot of things we talked about, I think at the last meeting, about the infrastructure and less pavement and more green and more trees. And so I think the word clean helps, I think defines that piece of the strategy.
Okay.
So I think the last thing I heard was accelerate the expansion to clean and equitable mobility.
Expansion of, that's what I put, expansion of, or
Yeah.
of, okay.
Any other comments on that? All right, thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, I think we're good. We are going to move on. Thank you so much. So now we get to look at objectives. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what's going into this next activity. So as a reminder, we have several inputs for each key element of RVA Green 2050. We have equity, we have climate action, and we have resilience. This is this integrated approach that we're working towards. It's a lot to remember and incorporate. So one of our roles as staff is to help you with that. So we talked through the equity screening tool 2 meetings ago. And at our last meeting, we went through the climate vulnerability and risk assessment together. And we'll be bringing more information on the results of that back to you at the next meeting, so we can use that to draft the strategies. Another input we'll bring to you in more detail for our next meeting is the greenhouse gas emissions modeling that's being conducted right now by a consulting firm called GreenLink Analytics. They're looking at what our emissions are now and what they're projected to be in the future with some pretty impressive tools that are incorporating legislation, everything that we are all aware of that's going on out in that big wide world of Virginia. So let's see. If we don't take any action, there's a business as usual case. If we take aggressive, ambitious action, doing everything we possibly can, then we have that RVA Green 2050 case. And we'll talk more about this at our next meeting, but for today, we're staying at a higher level. And then in addition to all these inputs, we've been looking at conducting research on best practices from peer cities. and on their climate action and resilience plans, and we'll share those best practices with you as well next time. But you will see a little bit of it today as we go into some examples. So in terms of aligning objectives, what led us to the draft objectives that we're going to be presenting to you today, we looked at the Richmond 300 goals and all of the ones that relate to transportation, and there are a lot. So those are on the left, and they are, equitable transportation is one of the goals of Richmond 300. Emerging transportation technologies, land use and transportation planning, Vision Zero, non-car network, streets, bridges, and connections, and there are more. Green link policies, these are kind of the buckets that we use to measure the goals and the modeling that we're working towards. So those are things like land use and commute incentives, alternative commute modes, electric vehicle adoption, clean public transit. And then under our peer climate action plans that we've been looking at, there are objectives. Everyone, the terminology for goals and objectives and strategies kind of floats around out there, but the high level objectives in their transportation plans are things like improve efficiency of freight movement, invest in EVs and charging stations, facilitate alternative commutes, establish car-free areas, create walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, expand and strengthen TDM requirements, reduce congestion and vehicle emissions. So as we aligned those objectives, we ended up with these 4 draft objectives, and these are just a launching point for today's conversations and our breakouts. So the first one, lead by example in reducing municipal transportation emissions and prioritizing resilient transportation infrastructure. So that's kind of the city leading by example. Then a second one, reduce vehicle miles traveled and prioritize investments that advance equity. The third one, resilient land use planning and development that prioritizes biking and walking. And then the fourth one, transition rapidly and equitably to electric vehicles, trucks, and transit. Now, just to kind of get you all thinking on the same page, there's a difference between objectives and strategies. And so what we're calling objectives are those overarching statements. So on that first one, an example strategy could be evaluate the transportation investments needed to create emergency egress from areas at risk of flooding. For the vehicle miles traveled objective, an example strategy could be support infrastructure projects with transportation options to move individuals from their homes to their jobs, focused on low-income areas and low-car ownership areas. For that third one, an example strategy could be consider permanent or temporary street closures and expanding and improving bike walk streets. And then the fourth one, example, could be transition public and private vehicles to modes that do not emit greenhouse gas.
And Dawn, Julie raised her hand for a comment.
So I think I understand the difference between objective and strategy, but I will say the thing that just kind of is hitting me about the objectives is they all seem to be from the city or the transportation system provider and not from the citizens or the community's perspective.
Okay, that's a great overarching comment. And when we go into the breakouts, that is definitely going to be something, because all of these can be rewritten. So when and everyone's going to have 15 minutes. I'll go over the activity in a second, but we're all going to have 15 minutes to make comments on all of these.
That's exactly the kind of input we're looking for in the breakout groups, though.
Exactly. So we're going to divide into 4 breakout rooms, and let's see. The facilitators are going to be switching between the rooms. So the first room is me. I'll have the first objective. Jeff is going to have the second objective, Kendra will have the third objective, and Wendy will have the fourth objective. Your groups will stay the same for the whole hour, and there's a Google slide deck. I think the link is in the chat. So you can click on that, and we want to make sure everyone can open it. And it's, once again, it's interactive. So it's post-it notes where you will enter your comments and you'll drag stars to things you like. You'll have open discussion. You'll have comments at the bottom under the notes if you have kind of more overarching themes. But you're basically going to be potentially rewriting the whole objective, breaking it up into more if you feel like it says too much in one and it needs to be, 2 or 3 statements, that's fine too. But the great part about this activity is that the notes will be taken from one group to the next. So you'll all get a chance to see what the previous groups had to say about that objective, and then you can build on it. So when you go into the breakouts, your facilitator is going to guide you on that objective, go over some peer examples, and talk a little more about the questions to consider. So, some of the questions are, is the objective statement overarching yet explanatory enough? What's missing? Could it be said better? If in your 15 minutes on that one objective, you feel like you've just your group has agreed on where to stop talking about that objective, and you want to start getting into strategies, we don't want to lose that. We will be talking about that in the next couple of meetings, but go ahead and enter any additional comments down below in that comment/feedback section on the slide. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Now, before I leave you, because once you go into your breakouts, your facilitator will give you more instructions. But I certainly want to give the stage to you in the greater group if you have questions or clarifications or want to talk a little more about what we're doing. Okay, then everyone's good.
Julie raised her hand.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I know I'm pushing this point a little bit, but so I think in my head, the objective is the outcome or the result. So it would have some value or value proposition to the recipient of that clean and equitable mobility. And then strategies are the how we would achieve those outcomes. Am I kind of on the right page on that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Yep, you got it. So back that 2-page PDF that I emailed yesterday, we also have the link in the chat. If you want to refer back to that has the questions that each stage of the plan answers, and it has a summary of those 4 objectives in one place if you feel like you want to kind of refer to that while you're in your breakout activity. Are there any other questions or points, or anyone from my team have anything to add? Okay, well, it's 1:33, so we'll give you 5 minutes, and when you come back at 1:38, we will send you into breakout rooms, and then I'll see you in an hour.
Do we want to pause the recording during the break or just let it go?
I'll pause it.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So thank you so much. Had great conversations, a lot of really good input there. Let me share my screen with you. I'm going to have to flip screens around here. Oh, this gets so tricky sometimes on this Zoom platform. All right, well, I'm going to skip that and just share. It's not behaving. Sorry. Okay, so wrap up and next steps. Our homework is to continue to edit those draft objectives and those Google Slides until close of business on Monday. So it's, as you can see, very iterative. It was great to kind of let everyone see each other's comments. So if you want to go back in and see what anyone said on those objectives after you, there's just tons of great feedback. So really grateful. Really helpful too if you could go back in and especially drag any stars to statements that you want us to focus on. You know, the more kind of consensus we have on which direction to go will really help us guide to the next meeting and what we're going to accomplish there in strategies. So with that, does anyone want to speak up about the discussions that you had in the breakouts? Kind of an open discussion on the activity. I think we're all thinked out. So thank you very much for all your input. The next meeting is in 2 weeks on February 18th, 1 o'clock. We'll be going deeper into drafting strategies. We'll bring back those objectives based on all of your feedback. And for now, there's a link in the chat to the survey. So definitely want to get your feedback on this meeting so that we can continue to improve and offer up any other ideas or best practices that you all have that you want to share with us to improve this planning process. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing. This is, we're ending a little early today, so I want to give your time back to you, but I will also be staying on this line if you wanted to stay on and talk to me or the sustainability team. Also want to invite you to share anything that you would like to bring up to the rest of the group, any events or updates or resources, things that you know about and you want to talk about. I see Julie has a raised hand.
Yeah, so thank you, Dawn. I don't have anything to bring up, but I was looking through the drafting objectives tool that you guys gave us. So as we're starting to think about strategies, is this where we more get into the details of answering these questions around like covering all key sectors, empowering Richmonders, community priorities, ensuring integration of equity and resiliency? I'm paraphrasing some of this. Is this really where we're going to get into kind of the devil in the detail will be around in the strategies part?
Exactly. So we put those questions as kind of guiding statements for the objectives because we want to make sure that whatever strategies we start developing will, fall under those umbrellas. But yes, you are correct. So between
Great.
now and the next meeting, be thinking about those strategies so we can start filling it in. Okay, well, like I said, I will stay on for anyone who wants to stick around. Otherwise, have a great day, and thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Don, could